She walked into that restaurant to celebrate the best night of her life. But what happened next, in front of everyone, left her frozen in humiliation. The chef's words cut deep. The room went silent. She thought it was over. Just one terrible night. She'd have to forget. But then someone started digging into the owner's past. And what they found, it didn't just destroy his business. It exposed 20 years of buried pain that an entire community had been carrying. This is that story. Patrice had worked for this moment her entire career. Long shifts at the hospital, double overtime, nights when exhaustion pulled at her bones. But she never quit. And finally, it paid off. The promotion she'd been chasing for 3 years came through. Her sister Maya insisted they celebrate properly. No cooking at home tonight. They deserve something special. So they chose the spot everyone talked about, that popular downtown restaurant with the glowing string lights wrapped around the patio, the live music floating to the open windows, and that open kitchen where you could watch the chefs work their magic. It was a humid summer evening, the kind where the air feels thick and alive. Patrice wore her favorite dress. Maya couldn't stop smiling. They walked in, and the hostess guided them to a table near the center of the dining room. Perfect view of everything. For the first time in months, Patrice felt light, free, celebrated. She had no idea how quickly that feeling would shatter. Before we go any further, have you ever walked into a place filled with excitement, only to leave feeling completely humiliated? Drop a broken heart emoji in the comments if you know that feeling. Because what happened to Patrice that night hits different when you realize how common this really is. The server brought their meals with a flourish. It looked beautiful, plated like art. Patrice cut into her chicken, took a bite, and immediately knew something was wrong. It wasn't just undercooked. It was raw in the middle, pink and cold. She wasn't trying to cause a scene. She flagged down the server politely, pointed it out with an apologetic smile. The server's face dropped. She took the plate back quickly, promising to fix it. That should have been the end of it. But 60 seconds later, the kitchen doors swung open, hard, and out came the chef. Not to apologize, not to reassure her, but to confront. He walked straight to her table, still wearing his apron, his face twisted in irritation. Other diners turned to look. The music seemed quieter suddenly. Patrice felt every pair of eyes shift toward her. "There a problem?" he asked, but his tone made it clear he didn't actually care about the answer. Patrice, caught off guard, explained gently. The chicken, it was undercooked. She just wanted... He cut her off, waved a hand dismissively like she was wasting his time. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and said something that made the entire room go still. The exact words don't matter as much as the venom behind them. The sneering condescension. The way he made her feel small, unwelcome, less than. It wasn't just rude. It was deliberate. The silence that followed was deafening. Other diners looked down at their plates, uncomfortable, pretending they didn't hear. No one said anything. No one stepped in. Maya's hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Patrice felt heat rising to her face, not from anger, but from humiliation. That horrible, sinking feeling when you realize you've been disrespected publicly and there's nothing you can do about it. They left without another word. No meal, no celebration. Just a burning shame of being treated like they didn't belong. Patrice cried in the car, not because of the food, but because of how he made her feel. Like she was a problem, like her complaint, her very presence, was an inconvenience he had to endure. Maya sat in the driver's seat, shaking with rage. "We're not letting this go," she said quietly. "Not this time." Maya posted about it that night. She didn't hold back. She named the restaurant, described what happened, and asked a simple question: why do we keep supporting places that treat us like this? Within 2 hours, the post had been shared 300 times. By morning, over 5,000. The restaurant's name started trending locally. Comments poured in, not just expressions of sympathy, but stories. So many stories. This happened to me there last year. I heard whispers about that chef, but thought it was just rumors. My family stopped going there after they treated my mom the same way. The algorithm picked it up. Local news pages started covering it. Food bloggers weighed in. The hashtags multiplied. Everyone expected the same thing, a polished PR apology. Maybe the chef gets a slap on the wrist. Business as usual in a week. But then something unexpected happened. A local investigative journalist, someone who'd been covering the community for years, saw the story and felt a nagging familiarity. The owner's name, Richard Whitman. Why did that name ring a bell? She started digging. Not into the restaurant, into Whitman himself. Pause right here. If you've ever seen social media hold someone truly accountable, hit that like button. Because what this journalist found, it changed everything. And you need to hear this. Public records don't lie. They just sit there waiting for someone to look. And when that journalist looked, she found a trail that went back 2 decades. In the early 2000s, Richard Whitman wasn't a restaurateur. He was a property investor. Specifically, he bought up homes in minority neighborhoods, Black and Latino communities, and engaged in what federal investigators later called predatory lending practices with discriminatory intent. The details were ugly. Families who'd owned homes for generations suddenly found themselves targeted with impossible loan terms. Foreclosures came fast. Whitman's company swooped in, bought the properties at fractions of their value, then flipped them or demolished them for development. Entire blocks changed. Families displaced. Generational wealth erased. One woman, Mrs. Lorraine Hughes, a now 78-year-old retired teacher, remembered it vividly when reporters reached out. "We thought we were refinancing to fix our roof," she said, her voice still carrying the pain. "Next thing we knew, we were being evicted from the home my parents built with their own hands. And Whitman's company owned it, just like that." He'd face lawsuits. Settlements were quietly reached. Money exchanged hands. But no real accountability. No admission of wrongdoing. Just lawyers and paperwork that let him walk away. And here's the part that made people's blood boil. The neighborhood where those families lost their homes? It's the same neighborhood where Whitman built his restaurant empire. The same streets. The same community. He profited off their displacement, then came back years later, opened trendy restaurants on land that was once theirs, and served expensive meals to people who had no idea what happened there. The irony was suffocating. Longtime residents hadn't forgotten. They'd just been silenced, their pain buried under new construction and city progress reports. But now it was all coming back. Does your community have someone like this? Someone who caused real harm but just moved on like it never happened? Let us know in the comments. Because these stories, your stories, they matter, and they need to be told. When the news broke, Whitman went silent for 48 hours. His PR team was scrambling. You could almost hear the emergency meetings happening behind closed doors. Finally, he released a statement, carefully worded, lawyer-approved, sympathetic in tone but empty in substance. He condemned the chef's behavior, called it completely unacceptable and not reflective of our values, announced the chef had been terminated immediately. Then he tried to pivot, talked about diversity training for staff, promised to do better, all the usual corporate language. But notice what he didn't address? His past, the housing scandal, the displaced families. When reporters pressed him directly, his team responded with, "Those matters were resolved years ago through proper legal channels. We have no further comment." Resolved, as if devastated families were just a checkbox item on a legal to-do list. Social media exploded again. People weren't buying it. He threw the chef under the bus to save himself. "What about the families you destroyed, Richard? Where's their apology?" This man built his empire on stolen homes and thinks firing one employee makes it right. The chef became a convenient scapegoat, but the community knew better. This wasn't about one bad employee. This was about a man with a documented history of harm who'd never faced real consequences. And they were done being quiet about it. Patrice initially wanted to move on. The humiliation in that restaurant already felt like too much to carry. Why make it worse by staying in the spotlight? But then community activists started reaching out. People who've been organizing for years around housing justice, economic equity, accountability. They told her about Whitman's past. showed her the articles, the court records, the testimonies from families like Mrs. Hughes. Patrice sat in her living room, reading story after story, and something shifted. This wasn't just about her anymore. That night in the restaurant, that moment of disrespect, it was a symptom of something much larger, a pattern. A man who'd spent decades treating certain people as disposable and who'd never been forced to reckon with it. She made a decision. She would speak publicly. Her statement came 3 days later. Not angry, not performative, just honest and powerful. When I walked into that restaurant, I was celebrating one of the proudest moments of my life. I walked out reminded that no matter what I achieve, some people will always see me as less than. But here's what I've learned since then. I'm not alone. And neither are the families Mr. Whitman hurt 20 years ago. This isn't just about one night. This is about a pattern of disrespect, displacement, and harm that's been allowed to go unchecked for too long. I'm speaking up now, not for revenge, but for accountability. Because silence protects the wrong people. The response was immediate. Community members organized. Within 48 hours, protests formed outside the restaurant. Not violent, not chaotic, just determined. Signs read, "Remember the displaced families." Accountability isn't optional. Justice delayed isn't justice denied. The crowd was diverse. Young activists, elderly residents who remember the housing crisis, families of all backgrounds who understood what it meant to be erased by people in power. Patrice stood with them, nervous at first, but surrounded by people who saw her, really saw her. One older woman, a survivor of Whitman's predatory practices, hugged her tight and whispered, "Thank you for not letting them forget us." And in that moment, Patrice realized something. Her voice, amplified by a community that refused to stay silent, had become a force. The pressure became unbearable for Whitman. His restaurant, once the hottest spot downtown, became toxic. Reservations dropped by 80% within a week. Major food suppliers quietly cut ties, not wanting association. Employees started quitting, unwilling to defend a boss whose past kept getting darker with every new article. The city council launched an investigation into his business licenses, questions about how he'd acquired certain properties, whether proper permits were filed. Suddenly, paperwork that had sailed through years ago was being scrutinized. Former victims of his housing schemes began talking to lawyers. The old settlements had silenced them temporarily, but statutes of limitations were tricky. Some families started exploring whether they had legal recourse. Class action lawsuits were mentioned. Whitman tried to hold on, hired a crisis management firm, did a tearful interview where he claimed he'd made mistakes but had grown. The community wasn't moved. 3 weeks after Patrice's night in that restaurant, Whitman announced the permanent closure of his flagship location, then the second location. Within a month, his entire restaurant empire was shuttered. Local news showed footage of the empty dining rooms. Tables still set. Lights off. A closed sign taped to the glass door. But here's the complicated truth. Whitman's downfall didn't undo the damage from 20 years ago. The families he displaced? Still displaced. The generational wealth he helped destroy? Still gone. Mrs. Hughes still didn't have her childhood home back. Accountability came. But justice? That was still incomplete. Patrice went back to work at the hospital. Same shifts, same patients. But something in her had changed. She started attending community meetings. Use her platform, because yes, she had one now, to advocate for housing justice, to amplify the voices of people who've been fighting long before that night in the restaurant. The incident sparked something larger. The town was forced to have uncomfortable conversations about who gets second chances and who doesn't, about whose pain gets acknowledged and whose gets buried, about what accountability actually looks like. Some healing began, slowly, imperfectly. A local nonprofit started a fund for families affected by predatory lending. Mrs. Hughes became a spokesperson. Young people got involved in housing advocacy. The conversation didn't end. It expanded. Patrice learned something profound through all of it. One moment of injustice, when met with courage and community support, can expose years of buried pain. And sometimes That exposure is exactly what's needed for healing to begin. Buried wrongs don't just disappear. They fester. They wait. And when they finally surface, they demand to be addressed. Whitman's story became a cautionary tale, not just about racism or discrimination, but about the illusion that you can outrun your past, that success can erase harm, that nobody will remember. People remember, communities remember, and when they come together, they become powerful enough to demand the accountability that was denied for too long. So here's where we are. One humiliating night in a restaurant became the spark that ignited an entire community's awakening. Patrice walked in to celebrate. She walked out humiliated, but she didn't stay silent. And neither did the people around her. Together, they forced a reckoning that was 2 decades overdue. Change is slow. It's messy. It's incomplete. But it starts with someone saying, this isn't right. And it grows when a community says, we're with you. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below. Have you ever stood up against injustice? Have you witnessed someone find their voice when it mattered most? We read every single comment, and your stories inspire us. And if you want more powerful stories about courage, community, and accountability, real stories that leave you thinking, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got more coming. Thanks for watching. And remember this, your voice matters. Even when it feels small, even when you're scared, because you never know who's waiting to stand with you. See you in the next one.